Hi guys, and welcome to the weekly session. This week we're following up from last week's session where we looked at combination play with a specific focus on the 1-2, and today we're going to be looking at the overlapping run, how players can use it, why it helps them, and also the little things that they might need to know in order to be successful with that kind of movement in a game. Before we start, I'd just like to mention our app. If you haven't downloaded it already, it's got some great tools on there, including a session reflection form, where it asks you a number of questions about your session that you can answer to reflect on it and hopefully use those reflections to be able to develop your coaching over time. If you're doing your UEFA C or your UEFA B license, or you have plans to, then it's a really good tool to get into the habit of reflecting on your sessions, as you will need to provide session reflections in your projects for those courses. The session reflection tool is free. You only have to sign up for a taster membership. Go to the website now. The link is at the bottom of the screen, foundationagecoaching.com. So this week's session is a session focused on the overlapping run. Again, I ran it with my under 9s this past week. There are a few things that I would have tweaked, but we'll go into them later as we develop further in the session. In terms of what you'll need balls, you'll need cones. If you have mini goals, great. If not, just use cones to replace them. And in terms of pitch space, I was fortunate enough to have access to a whole 7 versus 7 pitch, but if you don't, you can run this session with whatever space you have available. In terms of the outcomes of the session, I wanted the players by the end to be able to understand what we meant by an overlapping run, how to use clever movement to confuse the opponent, and also why and when we pass into space versus passing to somebody's feet. So the arrival activity for the players was the same as the previous week. It was 3v3 games with a slight alteration on how they're run. As I said, I'm in a fortunate enough position where I've got access to a lot of equipment. So I had one team defending a big goal, one team defending a little goal. The team who had the big goal to protect would have a goalkeeper. So it was actually more of a 3 versus 2 plus a goalkeeper than a flat out 3 versus 3. And there was a couple of reasons why I chose this. Number one, I'm trying to use these arrival games to offer a street soccer style format to get players thinking a little bit differently, to get players acting a little bit differently, to get players holistically seeing different scenarios that might appear in a game without me having to force my ideas onto them. It also allowed for a number of overloads, 3 versus 2 for the team without the goalkeeper. From an outfield perspective, once again, looking to see if they can use certain movements that I have planned for the session already within these games. The 1-2s from the previous week were hopefully going to come out, and there was also possibilities for overlapping runs to start happening before we even talked about them in the session. From my point of view, it gives me 5 or 10 minutes at the start to actually observe where the kids are at mentally. Now, I'm in a situation where I coach at an international school. So the kids are at school all day, they're coming straight to the training sessions. They've been with each other all day, they could have wound each other up, they could be getting on well, they could have been annoyed with the teacher in the previous lesson. They're still at the same venue, so I find it really helpful to use those 5 or 10 minutes to just observe where the kids are mentally, so I know exactly how much information or how little information I need to give them during the session. For yourself, it might be a case of getting the kids together and just giving them some time to play and socialise with each other and talk with their friends that they don't go to the same school with, especially if you're in charge of a grassroots team where you've got players coming from different schools. It's a really nice way to just give them that time at the beginning of the session to get that out of the system so that when you want to coach, they're ready to listen. So the first activity is a coordination cognitive exercise. The way that it works, everybody has the ball within inside the cone square. As you can see on the screen, the cones are all of different colours. Some are blue, some are red, some are yellow. The challenge for the players was to dribble their ball to a cone, turn and then go to another cone, but making sure they go in a very specific order of the 3 separate colours. Now they could do blue, yellow, red, they could do red, blue, yellow, they could do yellow, red, blue. It would be entirely up to them which order they went in, but it was up to them to remember which order they were going in. So if they went to a red cone first and a blue cone second, they'd have to think about going to the yellow cone third. After they completed one set, they could then change the order. But the idea was to get them not only moving with the ball and working on those coordination skills of ball control, toe taps, inside, outsides, all the different tricks and turns and ball manipulation areas of their feet that they need, but also to get them thinking about what they were doing while they were doing it. The progression for the session was to put it into a 1 versus 1. So the player on the ball still had to get to 3 different coloured cones in an order to score a point, and their opponent is trying to win the ball off them. Now, from the defending point of view, you can put the challenge on, can you remember the order that the player on the ball has gone in, so you can cut out those options to escape to the next one. You know if someone's gone to a red cone, they can't go to that one again. It's going to be blue or it's going to be yellow. How can you stop them getting to one of those two colours? Additionally, for the players on the ball, how can you use your disguise cap tactics and use that order to make the player who's defending against you think you might go one way to then go and take the other. Now, from an overlapping run point of view and linking it to the session later, if someone does make the overlapping run, the defender may follow. So then the space opens up for the player on the ball to take it. And as a result, including this practice as the first part of the session, making sure players are getting plenty of touches and they're working on their dribbling skills, they're working on their observation skills, was a big part for me in terms of getting out the outcomes that I wanted to in the next part. So we progressed into a 2v2 curver style game. Both teams had a goal to defend, two players would step onto the pitch and I was passing a ball in to one of the two pairs. Whichever person I passed the ball into, their teammate was to then make an overlapping run around them and then the game would start. I didn't want to actually coach the overlapping run, I was just asking them to perform it as early on. I wanted them to see what the defenders were doing in reaction to the overlapping run. I also wanted to give them a little bit of time to understand the practice and understand the need because, as you can see from the clip I put on the screen, the overlapping run was not happening every time. Sometimes I'd pass to this player and this player would just run that way because that's what they always do. It's almost like in previous years they've been conditioned to just stay on their same side. So sometimes that was happening, sometimes players were running around, but of course that might happen in a game. Players will make mistakes, players are not always going to get it perfect, so you want to see how the person on the ball reacts as well as how their teammate reacts as well, rather than going in, stopping the practice and saying, stop, you need to make that overlapping run. You might want to remind them if it keeps happening, but at the same time, give them those few minutes early on to see how they adapt to the practice. Now, the progression was that for the session was to add a little bit more of a competitive element to it. Who is the first team to score 10 goals? Now, in coaching circles, there's a bit of a debate in terms of what's the right way for young kids. Is it development or is it winning? For me, I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. While from my point of view, I want the kids to improve and grow and develop first and foremost. And it's not a win at all cost mentality from me. So for example, if one player is far behind, I'm not leaving them on the bench for the entire game. I do want to encourage that internal motivation and that competitive element within the kids themselves. So by putting on this constraint where it's the first team to 10 goals that wins, it's developing that internal competitive spirit that of course we want all of our players to have. Additionally, by putting a scoreline on it, what happens to a team when they go 2, 3, 4 goals behind? Have they got the mentality to then think, well, we can still win this, we can still get it back, or do they start giving up? Obviously, the emotional side in young players in particular, but players across the whole age spectrum is such a big part in football. So by putting these competitive elements onto practices, you're helping players understand how to deal with those aspects that when they go into matches, they're a lot stronger mentally to be able to deal with setbacks that may and probably will come within their games. The final game for the practice was a 4 versus 4 plus 4. We had 2 jokers in the middle, we had 2 jokers out wide. As an added condition, if the team scoring could combine with the joker in the build-up to a goal, it would be worth 3. I also highlighted the example that if you could play to the joker out wide and you felt there was a possibility, you could make an overlapping run and maybe try and move the defenders or get yourself free to put a cross in that situation. Now, one of the challenges I found with this, especially with the wide players, even though I gave them a touch limit of 3 touches, they were often taking about 5 or 6 seconds to play the pass back in. The reason for this is that they knew they was going to get no pressure from the middle. So what you might look to do, you put a time limit on how quickly the ball needs to be passed on. Or you allow that pressure to come from the inside onto the jokers in order to force them to pass the ball a bit quicker and make it a little bit more realistic to the game that you're going to experience on match days. If you want to keep up to date for week 3, then give us a follow. Additionally, give us a thumbs up if you like the video and leave any comments below should you choose to use this session. We'll see you next week.